Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Scott Mautz. Now, Scott is the returning champion. He's been on before. He's talking about his new book, which is really quite fantastic. It's called The Mentally Strong Leader. And we talked in part 1 about what mental strength is and how it's quite different than emotional intelligence. Still very good stuff, but mental strength is different than that. We talked about repressing feelings versus being with feelings and how important that is. We talked about these mental muscles and how you've got to build the whole set of them. And Scott talked about 6 prominent ones and how these 6 within them is a couple of them that you might think are kind of fixed and you can't change them, but actually that's not true. If you didn't hear part 1, I really encourage you, go back. If you just clicked on this, go back, listen to part 1. You're going to love it. There's a ton of really good, valuable information in there about what mental strength really is and how to become mentally strong. In part 2 here, we want to dive into a little bit more about mental habits. We want the setup for how to put those things in place so that you can build those muscles. And before we go into that, one of the things that Scott made an offer to us was he gave us a URL, which I'll ask him to give you again in a moment, where you could download this self-assessment. It's part of the book as well. So even if you don't get the book, you can just get the self-assessment. It'll help you. I encourage you to get the book. There's a lot more in it than that. But Scott, talk to us a little bit about this self-assessment, because I think that people maybe don't want to be too vulnerable with anybody else right away and really look at how they can, where their strengths and where their weaknesses are. We all know we've got strengths and weaknesses, but oftentimes it's hard to sort of pull those apart because, as I always say, if you're a fish, you can't describe the water. You're swimming around in your own crap. It's difficult to see. So tell us about that mental assessment and why it's so valuable.
Yeah, like you had said, it's chapter 2 of the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, and it only requires 2 things for you to be able to take it. Well, let's say 3. Maybe a pencil. You can write right in the book, a pencil. Remember what a pencil is? Do you remember those things?
Wow, man, how old are you?
Or a pen? Exactly right. It requires 15 minutes of your time, and frankly, it requires some vulnerability and self-honesty. The assessment is simply this. It's 50 questions that it took me years to develop with the help of data scientists, putting the questions together to make sure that the outcome of these self-questions would produce something that correlates as strong as it possibly could to my definition of mental strength. So you take these 50 questions, Dov, it literally takes you maybe 15 minutes. And here's what happens when you're done. You get, first of all, an overall mental strength score in one of 4 tiers. No tier is any better than any other. We're all competitive. We all want to score in the top tier. Well, guess what? The top tier is only 6% of over 10,000 people that have already taken the questionnaire. So you don't have to strive for the top tier. But if you're curious, the top tier, I call it a beacon. You're a beacon of mental strength. People are literally drawn to you because the level of mental strength that you exude, all the way down to the lowest tier, tier 4, there's tiers in between, which I simply just call novice. You're new to the concept of mental strength. Your mind is open to the possibility. You're ready to move from fixed to growth mindset we were kidding about earlier. Those are the different tiers. And you also, and maybe this is just as important here, you get a score by mental muscle. If you hadn't listened to the first part of this discussion, I'll quickly hit this again. There are 6 mental muscles that equate to mental strength: confidence, fortitude, boldness, goal focus, decision-making, and messaging, your ability to stay positive even in the face of negativity so that you send a positive message to those around you. You get a score for each one of these 6 mental muscles. So you can determine, we were talking before, you don't want to be a seagull. You don't want to have skinny legs. You want to work on all your muscles. You can determine which muscles for you are weak and require overhaul, which muscles are naturally great and you need to just maintain them. And the beauty of that, Dov, is that each question in the assessment ties to a specific tool in the book, The Mentally Strong Leader. So say you're on question number 32, I'm making this up, and you remember, yeah, I scored myself pretty low on that essence, that element of self-confidence. I'm going to go back to that. And by the way, there's a tool in the book that helps you get better at question number 32. So as a result, you can build your own customized mental strength training regimen that's exactly right for the unique source code that is you.
Fabulous. That seems very valuable. Before we dive in further into the tools and the strategies and the habits, etc., one of the things I want to come to that I remember reading in the book about, which is fortitude. I think this is another one of those misnomers that people really don't understand what it is. They perceive what it is, they interpret what it is, but they don't really get what it is. Talk to us a little bit about fortitude, Scott, because it really ties into where we started the show around your own emotional source code. But talk to us about how you lay that out.
Yeah, I think you can also use the word resilience. That's a pretty common word, Dub, that goes along with it. But it's the ability to push through challenges, onward towards achievement. And it sounds easy, but it's not. It requires a lot. It requires you to be good at solving problems. It requires you to have this inner strength. It requires you to have this, for lack of a better word, just willingness to reframe setbacks and the way you see setbacks. I'll give you an example. One of the tools in the Fortitude chapter that helps you understand what I mean by fortitude is called the 4 lenses of resilience. There are 4 different reframes for ways that you can completely reframe the way a setback is affecting you in your life. Simplest one is the agreeable adversity lens. And I use this simple one because it's the easiest one to demonstrate what I'm talking about. I call it the agreeable adversity lens. Not everything about adversity is disagreeable. There's always something that you can find in it if you stop and pause and consider, okay, how can I grow from this? How can I get better? What does this expose about me and my own weaknesses? What opportunities does this piece of adversity that I'm going through present? So that's, I guess, the best way that I can explain fortitude the way that I talk about it and help you build the skill in the book. Is a lot of it is about your ability to just reframe setbacks differently than your average person would. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that it's really important for people to grasp what fortitude actually is versus what they think it is. And oftentimes it becomes part of this putting on a face and pretending that it's all good. And, oh, well, we just got to look at it in the positive. I talk about dumb resilience. And I really explain this in the way that I was the king of dumb resilience before I fell. That if you knock me down 8 times, I got up 9. That's dumb resilience. That's not the same as fortitude. It's not the same as anti-fragility. What it is get knocked down on your ass, work out why I'm there, and then work out how to best get up. What can I learn from this? As opposed to just springing back up and going, oh, hit me again, which is what I used to be really good at. And I think the way you explain fortitude, particularly through those 4 separate lenses, is a really interesting and powerful way to do that for everybody. So I want people to get into that and grasp that. And again, I encourage you to go to the book for that, but you're probably going to have to go to the self-assessment first. And again, I know we asked you at the end of the last show, and we'll ask you again at the end of this one. Tell people how they can get that self-assessment. I know it's in the book, but otherwise is the gift.
Yeah, you bet. You can go to scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift, and you'll get the 60-page PDF that includes all 50 questions of the assessment, plus some prompts on how to get the most out of the book, The Mentally Strong Leader.
Fantastic.
Can I add one other point about fortitude before we leave that?
Please.
And this one might be more surprising. One of the first things people say, fortitude must include the ability to overcome setbacks. Of course. But my research has shown me something also pretty interesting, which is resilience and fortitude requires a smart, informed starting point. Meaning, you have to be able to identify when problems exist and do something about them, not getting caught in what I call the static trap. I talk about this in the book, which is simply this. The static trap is this. I've certainly fallen victim to it before. Static trap is when you could, first of all, be static for too long about a problem. Something's going on. You don't acknowledge that it's happening. You point fingers elsewhere. You just brush it under the rug. You try not to think about it until what? Until the problem can no longer be ignored. Then what? Then not only will you be in static, at that point, you create static. So yes, you've admitted a problem exists, but you create static around the problem by making excuses saying, oh, it'll go away. It's not really my fault. There's not really much I can do about it. It's actually your fault. It's not my fault. Then after we create static, we can remain static.
Yes.
We could identify, okay, I know I'm being static. Okay, so there's a problem. Okay, but it's not my fault. We're creating static. Then we could still remain static by choosing to stay just in one place for too long and not actually doing something about it. So avoiding the static trap where we can be, create, and remain static is essential to starting the cycle of fortitude, because it starts by admitting that you recognize you might be in crisis mode. And I think it's a part that people look past when you think about fortitude too often.
I think that's absolutely on point. And it's very interesting that denial is so much a big part of people's operating system, and there's nothing about it that actually helps. That brings me to this question, which is, you do a lot of work inside of very large organizations. You're helping those organizations. How do they get to recognize that they need to bring you in to speak at their conference? Or how do they recognize that they need to have you work with their team? Because by virtue of the title of the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, that implies to the ego mind, I have weakness and I need to have strength, and therefore I need somebody to come and help me. But to do that, I'd have to admit that I have weakness, and my ego's going, no, thank you. So how do they get to recognize that?
Yes, there's two crowds of people that bring me in to talk about the mentally strong leader with their organization. The first is what you would suspect. It's, okay, we are in crisis mode, or more often than not, and this won't surprise you at all, Dove, we're an organization that's worn down and we've gone through a lot of setbacks. There's a lot of burnout. We need something to rekindle and restoke our fires. We need to remain strong for all the challenges we know are ahead of us. That kind of organization brings me in a ton. Less common, but it does happen, are what I call the self-starter organizations. They're on fire in a good way. They're producing. And they're smart enough to know, though, that no positive business cycle, and I mean, literally, if you follow research, the average category, no matter what you compete in, no positive business cycle lasts more than 5 years before you face major inflection points. They know an inflection point is coming. They want to get ahead of it, and they want to build their mental strength skills in advance so they're ready for the next thing that's coming down to them around the corner. So those are the two sets of people that bring me in to talk about mental strength.
So I get the second group, the mentally mature enough, emotionally mature enough to recognize this is not going to last. We need to make sure that we've got it. But the first group will often sort of say, it's not our fault. We can blame this or we blame that. How do they get to recognize they need you? I get that they need you, but how do they get to recognize that? And obviously they're bringing you in, because what I want to do is help the listener who is going, is this what we need?
Yeah, I think a lot of it happens from, first of all, they learn about the book, The Mentally Strong Leader. I write an awful lot about mental strength for CNBC's Make It. I have a ton of courses on LinkedIn Learning that all kind of work in this area. Most of all, it's word of mouth of me having been a speaker and a trainer for so long. When they search even on Google and they're looking for help and leadership speakers and mental strength help, I'm proud to say my name usually comes up at the top of the list within that realm. And so I think they find out there's a lot of just evidence that I know what I'm talking about in the space. If you go to scottmautz.com, you can see some of my videos of me in action where I'm talking about elements of mental strength. And it's just kind of the proven case study that I'm an expert of working on this for over 3 decades becomes self-evident. And then people find me that way.
Yeah. So talk to us about the systems and the habits piece.
Yeah.
Because I think that most people are habitually doing things that are not serving them. They don't have systems for certain things, and they often will resist a system, even when there's one there. So talk to us about building these systems and the habits to help people become mentally strong leaders.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about this is sometimes you've probably experienced this stuff, right? Where you're presenting to a group, a keynote, a workshop or whatever, and you have some skeptics in the crowd.
Never happened.
Yeah, never happened before, right? Some of the people that like, I'm really busy. Who is this guy? Why did they bring him in? I've got a lot to do. They're looking at their watch. And then obviously they warm up to the thing that is the Dove, Bear, and Charm, and everything's fine after that. And I would like to think that it's the same for me.
We'll go with that.
We'll go with that. What I find usually wins these kind of people over is they're like, yeah, okay. So I need to form the habits to become mentally stronger. I got it. But building habits, everybody says that. I don't know how to do that. It's hard. Sure, you say it's frameworks. Here's the magic of it. It's what happens when you start by taking the mental strength self-assessment. Because what happens is you start to get a view of your own unique world and viewpoint. And all of a sudden, I'm not talking to you as a generalist who, yes, I have a lot of knowledge about the science of building habits, and I will teach you as a human being what gets in our way of building habits. You take the journey the rest of your way when you take that self-assessment, because then you're like, oh, this is a habit I need to build uniquely. My source code is different than everybody else's. I now have a blueprint for the unique things I need to work on. And so you start to pick the habits that are right for you. I would not expect everybody to use all 50 plus systems and habits in the book. It would be ridiculous. It's built as a menu in concert with the self-assessment. So Dove, you can walk away. And in fact, chapter 9, I encourage you to build a MAP, M-A-P, mental action plan, where you walk away and say, okay, these are the muscles I need to maintain. These are the muscles that I really need to work on. I'm going to embrace this habit, and this habit. There's over 50 of them in the book, because those are the most important to me. And then you build your own mental action plan. And when people understand that they can come from a place that's unique to their own environment and their own situation, it flips a switch and it gets them to believe very differently about their ability to change their own habits. Does that make sense or surprise you?
No, that makes perfect sense. And what I want to ask is, so when you come in and you're doing this inside of a company, not as a keynote, but you're doing this as actual work inside of an organization, and back to this Cleopatra theme, which is swimming in denial. What happens when you have a leader who cannot see that they're weak in this area?
Usually what I do is I know that ahead of time, and I have a version of the assessment that people can take about you, and they will fill out, okay, so Dove, how confident do you think Dove is in this way? You're using the Likert scale from 1 to 5. How bold do you think Dove is in this way? And if I'm equipped ahead of time with a skeptical leader who's in denial, that's what I'll do. If I experience it firsthand and it's revealed to me, wow, this leader is really skeptical, quite often, and I've done this 5 or 6 times now, Dove, I'll pull aside and I'll say, I understand that you took the assessment. The score was that you need to be bolder, but that surprises you because you think you're extremely bold. May I have your permission to add to your data set? May I issue this assessment done in a form of a 360 where people vote on your skill level in this? And then they might change their tune really, really quick, because I have a vehicle that allows us to measure that and whether or not they're blowing up their own version of how good they think they are at something.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing around self-assessments, because we have a self-assessment we do for a particular one of our programs, and we have everybody fill in that self-assessment before they do this particular training. This has got nothing to do with your assessment, because maybe mine, the one I'm using is, maybe it's faulty. Never, ever telling the truth. What I mean is that people will tell the truth they want to be the truth,
Yeah.
versus the truth that is.
Yes.
So this might be around belonging and attachment. So we do an assessment around belonging and attachment. And what people think they do, and I've really pushed this in question, are these people just massively in denial? Are they just horrible, horrible liars? And the answer is, they really believe the shit they put down. So, and that for me goes to cognitive bias. We're talking about cognitive bias, and that there's an inherent cognitive bias, a self-protective mechanism that's going on. And so this is where I get into challenges with even developing my own assessments, because I got lots of them, and even other people's, is like getting people past that cognitive bias. And that's why I like what you've done, is like, okay, so now let's put your people through the assessment for you.
Yes.
Oh, well, maybe I'm not so bold,
Right.
or maybe I'm not so open, or maybe I'm not so whatever it is.
Yes.
That has got to be a wake-up call. What's that like when you have that leader get that wake-up call?
I've done it multiple times, and it's very humbling for them. You do it in a way that they're not embarrassed, of course. It's something where they learn about the score in and of themselves. And it's a very humbling moment for them, and it opens their mind to the need for growth. The other thing that I do, even if I don't go so far, Dove, as to have the assessment taken on their behalf by others about them, I also find, and it's not perfect, but it helps, that I always raise the stakes for not choosing to be truthful with yourself. So for example, before I issue the self-assessment to a crowd, I make sure they understand, and I go through once again, there are 6 core mental muscles They correlate without doubt to achievement more so than any other muscles that you could develop as a leader. That is what is at stake here. Your ability to help your organization and yourself succeed in the face of adversity by self-regulating the right things. If you're not interested in doing that, feel free to take the assessment lightly and kid yourself if you want. I don't say it quite that way, but that's the essence of what I say. And I find that's also very helpful. To encourage the very true thing of what you're talking about is that is an inherent flaw in self-assessments. If not done right, we can lie to ourselves.
Yeah. And as I said, there's one thing to lie to the assessment. It's another thing to not even know you're lying. I always say to people that some people are lying, but they don't know it's a lie at the time.
Yeah, right.
And we do this with ourselves. I can remember something I've done on my own where I've made a promise based on this is absolutely, yeah. And then I've broken it. And I've had to say to the person, I lied. It was the truth at the time, but it's a lie because I'm evolving. And I didn't know this about myself, or I wasn't aware that this was that important to me. So it was a truth when I said it, but it became a lie. And I think that this is one of the things we've all got to learn to do, is to recognize that all truth is not equal, particularly over time. So a simple one is, am I the same person I was 10 years ago?
All right.
Absolutely not. Am I the same person as I was 30 years ago? Oh my God, it's another freaking universe than it was 30 years ago. And some people will hold on to these ideas of who they are like it's their oxygen.
Yeah.
Instead of understanding that there's an evolution. And this is what I like about the book and about what you're saying, Scott, is that this is building that muscle. If you don't keep it strong, it will atrophy.
It will.
You can be incredibly confident and have great confidence and boldness in your 20s and then have very little in your 40s, or vice versa, very little in your 20s. Like I was filled with self-doubt in my 20s and maybe even my early 30s, massively. As I said, the overwhelming self-doubt that it's not part of my reality anymore. I can go there, of course I can, but it's not something that's there every day. But there was a time. So is one true or another? The truth is you're here presently, and that's where you need to assess and be true to yourself if you really want to grow. So I want to come down to the benefit here.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to be a mentally strong human.
Yeah.
But that's different, I would say, than being a mentally strong leader.
Yeah.
Because that implies others.
Yeah. And I'll give you a perfect example to your point. Some of the habits you can learn from the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, can be some of the simplest things, insightful, but simple things that can have a ripple impact on others around you. To get to the benefit point, besides just being mentally stronger yourself, let me give you an example of how quickly this can have an impact on your organization if you do this. So we were talking earlier about boldness. Surprisingly enough, most people assume their boldness is fixed quantity. Well, let me challenge that for a minute and show you, to demonstrate the benefit that mental strength can bring to you as a leader for increasing boldness in your organization. I'll do it with a quick, simple story and a question to you, Dove. Let me start by this. Have you ever been in a casino before, Dove? I think I know the answer, but it just...
I have been, yes.
Okay, sure. I don't mean during the day when you're supposed to be working, right? I mean, for leisure.
No, I haven't been in the while I was supposed to be working, but yes, I have been in a casino.
You've been to a casino. So I want you to just picture you're on a casino floor right now for a second. I did some work with a casino company not so long ago whose name I can't tell you, based in Las Vegas in the United States. And I was going out to do some leadership training, and they brought me in the night before dinner to meet all the executives before we went to this workshop. And we had the most interesting discussion at this dinner. They were telling me about one game on the casino floor that they were having a throughput problem with, meaning the ratio of people standing around watching the game, but not stepping up and betting, was out of whack relative to the number of people who were actually stepping up and betting their money productively, such that it was creating a throughput problem. Now, I'll give you a guess. Let's see if you can guess what the game is. If you guess wrong, I'll tell you the right answer. But you want to take a guess at what game that might have been that was causing this issue?
I would guess blackjack.
It's a close second to the first biggest problem that they discussed, which was craps. And I'll tell you why. For those of you at home that don't know, it's rolling the dice in that pit. And if you haven't seen a craps table before, go Google it. You roll dice into a pit and you bet on the outcome of the dice. And the table is really intimidating to look at. It has squares all over. Hey, place a bet here. There's like 30 squares on the table. And what the casino owners were learning was that people were intimidated by this game. They didn't understand the rules of the game. And if you don't understand the rules of the game, you're not going to step up and spend money on it, right? You're literally not going to step up and roll the dice. If you've ever heard that saying, it comes from Vegas, from the game of craps. Well, guess what? Meanwhile, back at the office, if people don't understand the rules of risk-taking, they are not going to step up and roll the dice and take those risks. A simple tool I talk about in the Mentally Strong Leader to help increase boldness for your entire organization, to make your entire organization bolder, willing to take more risks, is to spell out the rules of risk-taking for the organization. What does a good risk look like? What does a bad risk look like? Who has to approve what level of risk? What happens when I succeed with a risk, fail with a risk, and so on? There's a list of 20 questions that you can share with your organization and have a discussion with them to say, these are the rules of risk-taking. It's a simple habit that you can build that creates conversation. And just like that, your entire organization is more likely to take risks because now they understand the rules of the game. That's the kind of benefit we're talking about when you learn the habits to become a mentally strong leader.
What a great analogy. Honestly, I've never thought about that way, Scott. Thank you. I think it really nails it down is that people are afraid to take risk when they don't know what the rules of the risk are, and therefore the potential loss or the potential gain. That is so on point. I can totally see that. I'm not putting my money down on a game I don't understand how I could win or lose. Why would I do that? It doesn't make any sense to me. And I've always thought about that as being my function of just who I am and how I am. But you're absolutely right. If I understand the rules of the risk, how that works, okay, I have a chance or I have X chance. That's really smart. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you couple that up with, as I talk in the Mentally Strong Leader, the desire to get the math right. Here's what I mean by that. A University of Georgia study showed us, Dove, that we as human beings are far more likely to overestimate the cost of getting a risk gone wrong, and we underestimate the cost of status quo. We get the math wrong in those two. And so if you can encourage your organization to get the math right, to stop underestimating how painful it could be for us to stay in the status quo, and you couple that up with the rules of risk-taking, you have just doubled your group's boldness. And I've seen it happen because I've implemented it in a lot of organizations with this book.
That is so on point. I have worked with companies and organizations. They're like, oh, well, we can't let this person go. They're so good at what they do. And I'm like, yeah, they're really toxic for the culture. And they go, yeah, we just can't risk it. And I'm like, yeah, just want you to know the cost of status quo.
That's right.
And the cost of status quo is every new person is leaving because this person is very good in one area, but terrible at culture. And so they're poisoning the system. And as a result, you're not paying it in one big chunk, which would be to remove this person, but you're paying it off in these incremental and compounded impact. That's such a really powerful point, Scott. Thank you so much for that. I really think that that's something to allow people to grasp around boldness is you got to get the math right. Wow, it's a really great point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott, we are already at the end of part 2 of the show. I want to make sure that people can find out more about you. This has been a phenomenal conversation, and there's been so many real nuggets in both part 1 and part 2. But I want to make sure that people can get more access to you, to your multiple books, I think 4 now. How can people find out more about you, about your books, about all your resources, etc.?
Yeah, go to scottmautz.com, SCOTTMAUTZ or Z, depending on where you are in the world. scottmautz.com, and you can find out all about all my keynotes, all the books, including my latest, The Mentally Strong Leader. And if you want the 60-page free mental strength self-assessment, along with some prompts to get the most out of the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, just go to scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift, and you can get that mental strength self-assessment for free.
And we'll make sure that all the links to the above are posted in the show notes. So if for some reason you didn't get them, we'll make sure that you know where to find them. Scott, it's been a pleasure and honor, sir. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your wisdom and for your caring. And for you, the leader, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe, and the leaders committed to positively shaping the political and business landscapes know that they've got to tap into what drives human behavior. That is the emotional source code. I am Dov Barron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified, actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and companies. Remember, we need your help in staying relevant, so please go to wherever it is that you tune into the show from and rate, review, and subscribe. And of course, a big thank you to you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about what it really takes to be a mentally strong leader. Because, as you've heard me say many times before, leadership is like parenting. If you want the people you lead to do better, you must do better. You have to lead by example. And that means being mentally strong and strengthening all of those muscles that Scott talked about in today's show. Please go read the book, go take the self-assessment, work out what muscles you need to strengthen so that you can really be a powerful leader. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and in your leadership impact. And I am out.